Imagine it's December 1817. You're 8 years old, and you haven't felt your toes in 3 days. The house your father built has only 3 walls. The fourth side is wide open to the Indiana wilderness, where the temperature has just plummeted to 20 below zero. History calls this the year without a summer, but for young Abraham Lincoln, it was a year of literal life or death. While most kids today are learning to read, Abe is gripped by a singular, terrifying task: keep the firewall burning at all costs. Because if that flame dies tonight, his entire family dies with it. This is the forgotten story of the frozen frontier, the brutal winter that almost killed a president before he ever had a chance to lead. But the cold wasn't just a bad winter. It was a global catastrophe. Thousands of miles away, a volcano named Mount Tambora had just exploded with the force of 10,000 atomic bombs. It shot so much ash into the atmosphere that it literally blocked out the sun. History calls 1816 the year without a summer. In some parts of the frontier, it froze every single month of the year. Crops failed. Livestock died. By the time the Lincolns arrived in Indiana in 1817, they weren't just moving to a new home. They were moving into a frozen wasteland where the sun barely felt warm, even at noon. Because the ground was frozen like iron, Thomas Lincoln couldn't dig a foundation for a cabin. Instead, he built what frontiersmen called a half-faced camp. Think of it as a shed with one wall missing. This was the Lincoln family home for the first several months of 1817. No door, no glass windows, just a pile of dry leaves for a bed and a fire that could not go out. Abe's job? The woodpile. At 8 years old, he was swinging an axe nearly as heavy as he was, felling hickory and oak just to keep the firewall tall enough to stop the family from freezing in their sleep. And then there was the hunger. With the volcanic winter destroying the previous year's harvest, food was a luxury. They survived on journey cakes made of cornmeal and whatever wild game they could track through the deep Indiana snow. By the spring of 1817, the boy Abraham Lincoln was gone. In his place was a laborer. Because they were living in a temporary shed, every day was a race against the next storm. Thomas Lincoln handed his 8-year-old son an axe and gave him a choice: clear the land or starve. Abe later wrote that he was almost constantly handling that most useful instrument from that moment on. He wasn't playing. He was fighting the forest for his family's survival. His hands were calloused and bloody before he ever learned to write his own name. But the frontier wasn't done testing him. In the chaos of the harvest, disaster struck. Abe was kicked squarely in the forehead by a horse. The blow was so violent it knocked him unconscious for nearly 24 hours. His father, standing over his limp body in the dirt, thought he was dead. The neighbors began preparing for a funeral. But then, the boy who survived a volcanic winter in a house with no walls opened his eyes. He didn't just wake up. He finished the sentence he had started right before the horse's hoof hit his skull. The indestructible Lincoln had arrived. 1817 should have killed Abraham Lincoln. The cold, the hunger, and the sheer physical brutality of the Indiana wilderness were designed to break anyone. But it did the opposite. Those 365 days of survival forged the iron he would need 44 years later to hold a splintered nation together. He didn't become a leader in a law office. He became a leader in a 3-sided camp, with an axe in his hand and no roof over his head. Next time you face a winter in your own life, remember the boy from 1817. He didn't just survive. He changed the world.